For today on Thought Rock Live, we have Peter McGarahan, president of McGarahan and Associates, and he will be speaking as advertised on purposeful practices. Pete has been in the industry for a long time. He spent 12 years at PepsiCo Taco Bell in IT and business planning, managed the service desk and all of the IT infrastructure for over 4,500 restaurants in 8 different zone offices, including field managers and corporate office. He had 2 years as product manager for Vantiv. He was executive director for HDI. Spent 6 years with STI Knowledge. You may know that as Helpdesk 2000. And now 7 years with McGarahan and Associates, obviously a founder of that organization. Pete also spent 2 years as chairman of the IT Infrastructure Management Association. I know Pete, have had the pleasure of meeting him several times, and I'm sure you will enjoy presentation today. And don't hesitate to ask questions, because I'm sure he'll have the answers. As an added bonus, Pete has graciously consented to provide our participants today with a copy of his ebook, The Complete Guide to Purposeful Support Practices. So with that, I will turn everything over to Pete. Please enjoy the presentation. Use your chat window to present questions, and I will interrupt Pete at appropriate moments and pose those questions so we can have a dynamic conversation. Over to you, Pete.
John, thank you very much, and my thanks to Wanda for helping us set this up, and my thanks to you, the audience who are with us today. As I was preparing for the presentation today, I just wanted to kind of share with you how this whole thing of purposeful support practices came to be. Really a couple of areas over the last couple of years that myself and the McGarahan Associates consultants have been implementing best practices. Two things we noticed was there was a shortage, or at least a lack of focus on strategy, at least service strategy. And the second piece we thought that there was a gap in is understanding the difference between a best practice and what the best practice is supposed to do, namely the purpose of that practice. So right before the holidays, I sat down with some of those thoughts and authored the Purposeful Support Practices Guide, which will give you a free copy after the webinar. And the Purposeful Support Practices Guide is about taking a step back and figuring out what you need to implement in order to put together a continuous improvement roadmap against a defined strategy. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of take you through my journey of how this whole support, purposeful support practices came to be. One of the areas that I said earlier that I think is lacking in our environment, in our industry, is the ability for service leaders to be strategic. And where that comes from is that the nature of the job really makes it hard to be strategic. And some service leader said to me very cleanly, it's tough to be strategic when you're delivering daily operations tactically. Even in my career at PepsiCo and Taco Bell, I had a mentor CIO that finally figured out that I didn't have a strategic thought in my body and actually told me so. And I said, well, the same thing. You know, I'm out there tactically delivering support every day to the customers in the business. Really, we don't find time to sit down and think strategically. So what I wanted to do today was we really need to create a service strategy, and that service strategy needs to be aligned with business goals and objectives. But at another important part, we need to realize that there are elements of the job that we do in service leadership that involves being strategic, namely creating the long-term vision, goals, and objectives based on some desirable end result, namely the metrics that hold us accountable for performance. And then there's the tactical piece, and then the operational piece. Operational piece meaning what we do on a day-to-day basis. Coming back to the tactical side, we need to do some planning about how we're going to achieve those long-term visions and goals. And what tactical means to me is you're coming up with plans of action, and those plans of actions are going to enable you to deliver on an operational basis. Service strategies. I'm really hell-bent on service strategies being aligned. And what I mean by aligned, not just the business goals and objectives, but really taking it down to the level where everyone on the team knows what the vision and strategy is. If you're a big fan of John P. Cotter, who wrote Leading Change, you know that Cotter has a 5-step program for leading change. And one of them is that we have to share and articulate our vision and strategy with our team. They need to know what that strategy is, and we need to make it real for them. We need to take the strategy and make it tactical and make it operational. Namely, in terms of aligning this strategy with business goals and objectives, we need to take it down to the what, the how, and then make sure that we're measuring what we're doing and how we're doing it to the end result. Then we have to take it down to all the team members' performance appraisals, to their performance scorecards. And we need to be able to set expectation and roles and responsibilities for what we expect out of their performance on a day-to-day basis and hold them accountable for that performance. That's truly what alignment is. And we need to be able to take the time as service leaders, take the time to strategically think about how we accomplish that. You know, you not only need goals and objectives, but we need really to establish ways in which we will govern our scope of services. One of the things I find most in service organizations is that their scope is way too complex and way too large for them to be successful on a daily basis. You know, knowing what work you're missioned and purpose to deliver and being really strict about focusing on delivering that work and really control of your scope so that people or teams or management is not giving you work that takes you outside of your scope of success. What scope of success means is service desk service organizations were really created to deliver value in supporting both reactively and proactively the customer and employees' use of technology applications and systems. If there's work that you're doing that takes you away from that mission, then you need to think twice about that. And then thirdly, building success metrics to measure business value. What's the business outcome of what you do? You know, with all this new technology that's going mobile, with all the new technologies that are going cloud, what is the service and support model look like, and how can we help our employees and customers be more productive in their use of all this new technology?
So, Pete, quick question here. Someone's asking, you say that service leaders have to allocate the right amount of time, but how do they free up that time? How do they make time to do strategic planning?
Well, it's a great question, John, and I think the first thing that they have to do is really take control of their calendar. I used to block time off on my calendar to be alone, you know, to be by myself and have some quiet time for thinking on the strategy part. If you don't block your calendar off and make kind of alerts to yourself that this is thinking time, then you're never going to get it. People will kind of access your calendar at will. The second suggestion is to start reading. I would suggest 3 books right away. One is The Art of Execution by both Citi and Ram Charan, great book. The second book would be Good to Great by Collins, and the third book would be Leading Change by John P. Cotter. Reading books kind of open our eyes and open our perspective into different areas that we may not be thinking about because of the daily operational churn of what we do. And then the third thing I would suggest is to expose yourself to strategic thinking people, to get on cross-functional teams, to really make yourself available to people that have the business of being strategic and find out how they think and what they do and start working on some examples of strategy. I think that's a good start at least. From a service strategy, I think it's important to tie all the things that I mentioned: business alignment, goals and objectives, business value, anything around measurable goals and objectives. One of the things I think that's very important about what we do in service desk and service organization work is that we should come up with a strategy that's real, that's meaningful, that's clear and simple. And so this shift left strategy, for me to articulate it to you and executives, what I would say is the heart of shift left strategy is to bring resolution closest to the customer. And in bringing resolution closest to the customer, it's really important for me to understand where we resolve issues and requests in a tiered single point of contact support model. And so what I do is call mapping exercises to understand where the issues and requests are being assigned to and where they're being resolved, and what's the cost of all that activity. If I could come up with a cost of incident or cost of resolution, cost for support, now all of a sudden I have a financial kind of aspect to my service strategy that says, if I know where issues and requests are being resolved and I create a shift-left strategy to move resolution closest to the customer, and I have ways in which I can do that through purposeful support practices, then I'm going to be able to measure the impact of this activity and strategy in terms of reducing the cost of support. And reducing the cost of support means that I'm also looking for repetitive and reoccurring issues, and through root cause analysis and problem management, targeting them for elimination so that I can commit to 10% issue reduction year over year, which allows me in my call mix to make room for new systems, new technology, and new valued services that typically I can't get to because I'm solving the same things over and over again. It's also important that a good strategy has a supporting structure. This is an example of a supporting structure where we look at the single point of contact and end-to-end transparent and seamless support. Namely, the two terms I usually use with this support structure are we have a customer support team service desk that is customer-focused, and we have one team perspective in terms of how we deliver end-to-end services, even if we have to escalate and assign to other groups outside the service center service desk. But we have an accountability for the ownership of that issue in terms of timely status updates and timely resolution according to the priority matrix. What also is important is that as we track the issue in terms of where it's resolved in the support model, in that shift-left strategy in terms of bringing resolution closest to the customer, we want to make sure that we're doing the right purposeful support practices at the right area. Namely, do we have a good focus on knowledge management? Are we doing the right things to contribute to increased first contact resolution? Are we managing our operating level agreements when we assign and escalate in order to make sure that the customer knows where their issue is in terms of the resolution process? Are we looking at these incidents afterwards to make sure that we have a call elimination, issue elimination focus to that? You know, at all times, we should be looking at ways that we can eliminate and drive resolution closest to the customer, increasing first call resolution, eliminating issues, and then also targeting FCR-type issues for self-service. There is no better pool of call mix than the first call resolution, first contact resolution. We should be looking at those all the time to see which ones we could shift to self-service so that customers can help themselves resolve their own issues 7 by 24 without the service desk being involved. I'm told all the time, Pete, how do I get started? You know, this service strategy sounds like a good thing, but can you give me some indications, some tips on how to get started? Well, I'll come back to what I feel is a strength of what I learned in consulting, which is you always have to know where you are. And in knowing where you are, that's really about assessing your current performance around your strategy and support model, processes, people, and tools, and everything to do with measuring and reporting. You have to know where you're going, right? You have to have that vision. You have to have that strategy. You need to be able to visualize and simply articulate what you think the end result is, right? Where are you going and how are you going to know that you've arrived? What does that end result look like to you? And then having the plan to get there, that continuous improvement roadmap, you know, understanding what the gaps are between where you want to be and where you are, and figuring out what you need to do to get there and what the time frame is to get there. So these are 3 things that I think are really important once you start figuring out the strategy and the structure, then how you're going to go about improving or implementing the purposeful support practices. Also, a part of this is on my website, I did an article on call volume spikes and how to manage it, and we'll provide that link to you as well. You're welcome to that white paper. But it really is about understanding where the demand is and measuring the demand and knowing what you can do to be proactive about spikes in demand. One of the things that we do at McGarahan Associates is we do a pretty detailed demand and supply study. This really helps us understand what demand is, where demand comes from, and what the fluctuation in demand is, and try and map that up to the supply of resources we have. Clearly, in this model, in this structure, the understanding of demand and supply is very critical to your success. How and what channels you offer the customer, how you route the incident and request through that channel through a consolidated and singular process with mapped to a tool and a workflow. All of that's really very important. In fact, the last statement here I would make is that we need to make sure that we provide the same customer experience across all access touch points. And then we have to really target and automate and integrate these processes into the workflow of the technology so that we provide service and support across all channels the same and deliver the same customer experience. So that's really what managing the demand and supply model looks like. And to give you more detail around that, one of the opportunities I think in this whole assessment between where you want to be and where you are is looking at all the band-aided processes that we have in place right now. I'm sure all of you have a few. What's a Band-Aid process? It's one of those things that comes along during the day that's a reactive nature to some directive or some issue. And we say, well, if we do this or that, that'll solve the problem. Well, yes, it does temporarily, but it might create more problems in the long term. We need to understand what band-aided solutions we've put together, and then when we take a step back and look at everything that we're going to do going forward, we need to make sure that we, one, address those band-aid solutions by looking at processes that have an end result to them that are seamless, that are efficient, and that have the same consistent, effective result. So please take a look at your customer touch points, your access channels, and how you flow them through your integrated technology and process mapping, and look for ways to improve that.
Pete, we have a question. Why do organizations keep adding access channels without looking at streamlining the process and driving towards consistent call handling and a customer experience? Why do you think that happens?
Well, to be blunt, John, it's easy, right? It's easy to add channels. It's harder to figure out how you're going to take that channel and run it through kind of a singular process and a workflow within a tool to make sure that your customers get that kind of seamless and consistent support. I also think that we get challenged. For an example, I was working with a company that wanted to introduce self-service. And so they opened up the self-service portal and gave employees the opportunity to open up tickets and then have those tickets go to a queue. Well, the end result was really no difference impacting-wise, because they had a queue on the phone, and they were just switching the queue on the phone for a queue in a in a ticketing system. If you really want to gain kind of efficiency, you would have taken the self-service queue, allowed them to open up their own tickets, but based upon categorization, assign or route that ticket or request to the group that's responsible for doing or handling that job. But otherwise, we had to take people off the phone to really manage the queue that was now, instead of the phone, now in the ticketing system. So we really have to take a step back and look at what we're trying to accomplish by extending the channels or access channels out to the customer, and is it the right thing to do? Are we improving the customer experience, or are we making something that's a manual process automated for our service desk technicians, or what's the end result, or at least what's the expected end result that we're trying to accomplish? So I wanted to at least share with you, and there's much more detail around these support practices than I'm going to spend in 45 minutes, but the white paper and the ebook have some great detail in terms of what these 5 practices are, namely achieving first contact resolution, making UFFA a priority, UFFA standing for use, flag, fix, and add, which is a KCS principle, mapping call types for action, introducing customer impacting technologies, and then storytelling through the balanced scorecard, holding people accountable to both individual performance metrics as well as team performance metrics. You'll find that the purposeful support practices have components to it in the ebook, namely what's the purpose of this practice, what do we expect in terms of measurable results, what are the benefits from it, what's the people impacting things that we need to think about, and then what are the process impacting things we need to talk about. You know, part of the items that we need to make sure that we understand in order to sell this to the audience and stakeholders involved in the whole service and support is really taking the capabilities of the service model and then applying those capabilities to a particular strategy. But in the meantime, we also need to know what the desirable end result of all this should be, and then we should be able to articulate benefits. So it's really about capabilities being applied correctly, driving the same or end result that's expected, and then occurring or realizing the benefits that we know it can have. So just first contact resolution, if we look at it, it's truly the most efficient and effective way to resolve customer issues. We look at equipping the front line with the right training tools and processes to be successful. Think about the pilot cockpit, that we design the frontline service professionals system to be able to really reach any tool or button or information that they need within a certain guideline. That's, to me, what the pilot cockpit is. It's being able to provide the necessary access to tools all within one kind of common desktop that allows service professionals to be successful in achieving first contact resolution. The other one is looking at ways to integrate and automate any of the process workflow as well. It's knowing the who, what, and why of the call demand, and we'll get into that in a little more detail with the whole call mapping analysis, which is the purpose of it, to know who's calling, to know what they're calling for and why they're calling. This helps us categorize better and then leads to better results in the call mapping exercise. And then understanding what success metrics around first contact resolution, like first call resolution, having a good standard definition for that meets industry standards, being able to measure how you use your knowledge in order to contribute to first call resolution or first contact resolution, making sure that you do transactional customer surveys and measure the customer experience, understanding the mean time to resolve and the impact on that with shifting left, bringing resolution closest to the customer and achieving a first call resolution, and then what that impacts to the operating level agreements as well. Making UFFA a priority, as many of you know, use, flag, fix, and add is something of a knowledge-centered principle. UFFA is a practice for operationalizing knowledge management. And I love UFFA because it can be done. I mean, you look at knowledge management, and it truly is an elephant in terms of making sure that we do all the right things at the right time. But UFFA, to me, simplifies it. Really, we should be operationalizing a part of UFFA into the service culture that really makes knowledge management a part of everyday operational responsibility. Namely, if I'm a service professional, in my role, I'm either using knowledge. If the knowledge is not accurate or up to date, I'm flagging it for someone to fix. And then once it's fixed, we add it back into the knowledge. All the while, if there isn't any knowledge based upon a search I've done for a particular incident, I flag that as well, saying there's no knowledge for this incident. We need to add it. and that's everybody's responsibility.
Pete, we have a question there. That seems pretty straightforward. In my observation, organizations seem to struggle with this. Why is that, do you think?
Well, John, I'll actually go to my next slide because I really try to address that with that question, which is it doesn't necessarily have to be hard. I think people make it harder than it is. We have to, eat an elephant, as they say, one bite at a time. To me, OOF is the one bite. It's something that, speaks loudly of knowledge management practices. At the same time, we can take it and make it operational. We can measure it. We can map it into a process. We can map that process into an automated tool feature. There's a lot that we can do with use, flag, fix, and add that I think makes it operational and takes away some of the complexities of knowledge management that have prevented organizations from being successful with that venture. So really in this slide here, we need to kind of look at our knowledge management and we need to make it operational. We need to know how we could use knowledge management in the service desk arena to minimize escalations and achieve a first call resolution. We need to be able to make sure that we can then take first call resolutions and then shift it to self-service if the issue and request is non-complex and can be articulated in an audience kind of version of languaging that would guarantee success. I think on self-service and knowledge management, there's always three things that I'm looking for to be successful. One is, what is the adoption of the user community, employee community, or customer community with the self-service website? What's their experience measured through a customer satisfaction survey? And then what is the percentage of successful resolution or successful completeness of anything that's being offered on self-service? If I know those three things, I can go back to management and confidently state the success of my self-service venture. Targeting stakeholder adoption means looking at the right roles. And so these are four roles that I think allow us to take knowledge management and be successful in the operationalizing of UFFA. A knowledge manager, subject matter experts or content experts, the frontline analysts who use knowledge on a constant daily basis to drive first call resolution, and then our collaborators. These are the people that work with the subject matter experts and the knowledge manager, and they understand which knowledge articles need to be flagged because they're not quality-minded or they're not up-to-date or current or they're repetitive. And these collaborators help us keep the knowledge on a quality-minded level. The resulting end is that we use knowledge. I think the one question that I would ask all frontline analysts that would give me an indication of the health of the knowledge management strategy and knowledge management implementation at any service desk organization in the world would be, tell me, frontline analysts, what is your confidence in the knowledge base that you have installed at your company? Because it's all about the knowledge confidence that frontline people have. If they do have the confidence in it, they're going to use it. And if they use it, they're going to be successful. And that's really what it comes down to. We have to focus on quality, measurable results. And we have to care that the knowledge that we're sharing is good and that it works. And we have to continue look for more knowledge that's going to help us drive consistent resolutions at first contact or self-service. Another one of the purposeful support practices is call mapping. Basically, what we're trying to do here is through categorization and characteristics of calls and issues is really understand where the call mapping falls. One of the exercises I use is what's the volume of different categories of calls, what's the talk time involved in those calls in terms of resolving them, what's the technical complexity, are they repetitive, what kind of tools are necessary to resolve them. And this gives me an indication of a matrix that I can then take actionable, educated decisions on what I want to do with these call mixings, call mapping, based upon if it's a short duration call and low complex, maybe it's self-service, maybe I would source that out, maybe it would be low skilled for new employees or low skilled for outsourced workers or part-time workers, but I really need to understand the dynamics of my call mapping and the characteristics of it and put it into a design aspect like a matrix or a quadrant that I can start to make better analysis and better business decisions around that. And that's really important to look at. We need to do a mapping of call types that will give us the analysis and better decision making for action. This is just an example of targeting call types in terms of, are they how-to and repetitive calls? Are they operational calls or technical calls? Are they a new call mix or are they old repetitive calls? And then having a plan to direct these either to self-service, do they have knowledge articles or not, and I need to add them? Do we have training on this or not? And maybe that's why there's a long talk time. Are these reoccurring repetitive en route to problem management and part of problem management's focus? I mean, these are really all the things that we need to be thinking about when we do a detailed call mapping. And then lastly, from a purposeful support practices side.
Sorry, we have a question.
Oh, sure, John. Yeah, I was just trying to be respectful of people's time.
Yep, we did have a question. No problem. Yeah, actually, time-wise, I think we're pretty good. Participants know that we'll wrap up in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so, including questions, and I think you're doing pretty well there. Question-wise, do you have an example of somebody who's implemented call mapping analysis and what actions or corrections they got?
Yeah, I do. In this group, they were a retail support center, and one of the challenges was that they were rolling out technology into the retail outlet too quickly. Also, the retail managers were telling their retail personnel that they should call the help desk about anything, anytime they had a problem. So the call volume of this support center went from 20,000 calls in a month to 35,000 calls. And so they just didn't have the people to deal with that volume. And then also with the rollout of new technologies so quickly, they weren't trained on how to support these new technologies. So what we did was we did a call mapping exercise to see what we could do about it and see if we could get an action plan together. And two of the things that came of it was, one was that there was 40 to 45% of the calls were operational, non-technical, that we could put out self-service learning pieces onto the website and then partner with the managers and market managers to say, hey, these are operational, non-technical issues. We're going to put them out on the website because they don't change. The answer is the same all the time, and we're going to encourage you to send your people there rather than calling. And then the other one was looking at the long duration of calls, talk time, and then flagging the ones that were complex from a technical side, and then working with the developers and engineers who were distributing this technology to see what we could do to either improve diagnostics, troubleshooting, to get that to the right skilled person, or some of these calls we were taking 10 minutes to troubleshoot, and there was no way that the frontline help desk was going to solve it. So we made a partner decision that as soon as we knew that it was this type of technical issue, we routed it right to that group right away without taking the 10 minutes of the customer's time. So these are things that people can think of when looking at a detailed call mapping analysis. In terms of introducing customer impacting technologies, one of the great things about talking to your customers, having a relationship with your customers, and giving your customers a voice is really knowing kind of their perspective of what it feels like to have customer impacting technologies forced upon them. And so in any rollout of technology systems or application, one of the roles that the support center can play is really kind of front-ending the customer perspective and the customer impact of new technologies being introduced, and being able to offer voice of the customer sessions and how is this working, these are the things you need to know, what are the productivity opportunities. One of the things that we went from in a recent service desk was they were always known as a reactive kind of help desk, and they decided to look at proactive services that they could offer to increase their value proposition. Well, one of the things they did was that they started to learn these technologies in terms of how it could be applied to improve employee and customer productivity, and then they would send out weekly notes to the customer base saying, did you know? And the did you know kind of focus was, hey, if you do this, this, and that, you're going to save time. Or did you know that the tool now can do this, and this is a productivity saver? And so understanding how technology can be used, the usability of it, could be a service desk responsibility, and certainly be at the valued services side of the equation. I think also we need to make a commitment to our customer to be there for them, to be their voice, and to represent their voice back to the business, back to technology, to really understand what technology impacting technologies do to the business and to the customer, and really focus from a quality standpoint on owning issues from a resolution side, but then again, making sure that people are aware of the impacting issues that are repetitive and recurring. But, you know, make sure that you make a commitment to your customers. Some people call that an SLA, and maybe an SLA is part of it. But right here, I offer stating your customer-focused commitments, and these are in languages that the customer can understand. Typically, a contract doesn't have language that a customer understands. That's why it's important to make that commitment. And then the reporting aspect, making sure that we can report and tie back to that strategy, tie back to that structure, the people, the process, the tools, make sure that we're doing all the right things in the metrics side, performance scorecards, and then real-time dashboards. You know, we want to solve it on first contact. We want to reduce the number of escalations and issues that are there. We want to deflect any type of, let's say, request fulfillment to the self-service portal. We want to do a number of things that hold us accountable to our customers. And finally, I would encourage all of you out there that are service leaders not to be a checklist manager. A checklist manager is someone that manages a checklist and thinks they're done by checking off that checklist. I think we have the opportunity to really look at it from a what we call a done perspective. Done means that it's, you know, checklisted, but done means that we followed up with the people that we were impacting. We made sure that everything was done to ensure success of the way we wanted to implement it. We make sure that we're getting the results that we wanted. We make sure that people are communicated to properly. And if something is not working the way that it should or was intended to, we go back and we continuously improve it. So being a checklist manager, to me, doesn't mean that somebody's focused on a quality piece, and it doesn't mean they're focused on continuous improvement. When we look at the implementation of expensive technology, really we should take away lessons and focus on making sure that we provide quality, not quantity, doing it right the first time, and make sure that we maximize the capabilities of any technology solution by looking at the capabilities, how we apply it, what we're measuring as the end result, and what those derived benefits are. And that should be across the board in any tool, people, and process combination. I wanted to thank all of you for your time, and I wanted to thank John and Wanda and the Thought Rock people for giving me the opportunity to be with you today.
Thanks, Pete. That's very informative, and appreciate that your slides are well done and not death by PowerPoint. It's always nice to see someone who's put the time and effort in. We've had some questions along the way. If there are any other questions, we do have a few minutes now to take those. So please feel free to hit that chat button and post any questions that you'd like to. Otherwise, we will wrap up in the next few minutes. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And don't forget next week's session, which is the Incident Management Metrics, the University of Miami case study. So don't see any other questions at this point. Once again, thanks, Pete. And we will send out the link to Pete's book so that everyone can get that. Pete, if you can just hit the next slide. I think it's our wrap-up slide. Yep. There we go. So our contact
Thank you,
information
John.
is there, and we will follow up with everyone and make sure you get that link. Thanks again, Pete.
Thank you, John.